next step once you've set up your profile is obviously finding the right family. I would really say with this, make sure you read the profiles really carefully so that you fully know what is expected of you. There were profiles that I read that I have to admit I kind of skim read a little bit. Maybe some of the daily tasks I just kind of thought, okay, yeah. And I didn't properly read them in detail. And so there was a family that I found that I thought seemed so nice, and I really liked the sound of them. And I nearly messaged them, and then I read their profile again, just to get another idea of them. And I saw on rereading the profile that I would have to get up at 5:30 every morning. I'm not a particularly good morning person. Right now I wake up at 6:30 and that's early enough for me. I could not do 5:30. So I then didn't message the family. That was it. I knew that I didn't want to do that, so I just didn't initiate conversation. If I hadn't reread the profile and read it thoroughly, I would have found this out. I would have realised at some point that I had to get up early, but it would have been much further down the line. So by reading the profile really carefully, really thoroughly, you can just save yourself a lot of time rather than just contacting loads of people, having conversations with them, and then realising, oh, this is expected of me. It was in the profile, I didn't notice it, and it's not really something that I want to do. So you really want to make sure you pay attention to the details. I would also recommend that you suggest regular video calls to get to know the family. So I did this with my host family. It was actually their suggestion. Before we had even signed the contract, I think we had about 4 video calls so that we could get to know each other and see whether I was the right fit for the family and them for me. And then after I had signed the contract at the end of January, I think, we then continued to have regular video calls, so approximately once every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes we would miss it, obviously, there are other things that happen, but on the whole we stayed in touch fairly regularly, and this was so helpful when it came to moving here. It just meant that when I arrived at the house, I felt so much more comfortable than I'd expected to. Because I knew these people, I was very familiar with the way that they spoke, their sense of humour, even the way that they moved, just everything about them. Well, not everything, but a lot of things about them I was already familiar with. I'd met the children a couple of times over the phone. So it really didn't feel that daunting coming into the home, which I had expected it would. But I found that I settled in really, really quickly, and I think that is largely down to the fact that I did video calls. So there were no unusual surprises, there was no real feeling of unease. Obviously, it still took a little bit of time to adjust and to get used to the fact that I was with a different family, and there are elements that I didn't expect and that they wouldn't have expected of me. But on the whole, there haven't really been any surprises because I kind of knew what I was getting myself into, because I had that consistent contact from very early on. It also allowed them to get to know me, which was really helpful because they could see that I was a good fit for the family, and they could also work out what kind of things maybe I would like or wouldn't like and what kind of person I am. So it meant that they could really accommodate me very well, which was really appreciated when I first got here. And if you do video calls, I would really advise that you make a note of any questions that you have before the call. This way you can ensure that you don't have any gaps in the knowledge in what you're going to do and what the next year will look like. You have a really good picture of how it will be. Obviously you can't know everything and you can't expect everything to be exactly as it's described, but I think it helps you to go into the experience feeling a lot more confident when you have a very strong idea of what to expect. And it shows that you're keen, it shows that you're ready to tackle the role, that you have initiative, and I think these are all things that host families want in their au pair, so I think it looks good on you. if you ask these questions, as well as being really helpful. So the final thing that I will touch upon in this episode is bureaucracy. So if you have to apply for a visa, I would advise that you do it as soon as possible. I think for me, when I applied, I couldn't apply for the visa any earlier than 3 months before I intended to move, which then made it a little bit tricky because I had booked a trip. I was going travelling over the summer, so I needed my passport back in time for travelling. But right at the time I should be applying for the visa, I had my university final exams to finish my whole degree. So I was obviously quite stressed and quite busy. This meant that for me, the visa process was quite rushed. It was quite stressful. I didn't know if I'd get my passport back in time to go travelling. I was quite worried about that. I was very lucky. Everything went smoothly. I think I got my passport back 3 weeks after I applied for the visa. But sometimes there are hiccups. Sometimes things can take longer. There might be a problem that needs to be solved. So I would advise that really as soon as you can, you try and get it sorted, because it just avoids any last minute stress and extra worries on top of the fact that you're moving country. So you're probably already going to be a little bit nervous. And finally, with the bureaucracy, make sure you really fully read the contract before you sign it, and that you ask any questions before you sign it. Sometimes there can be a tendency to be a little bit nervous about asking certain questions. Maybe they're related to finances, or they're just questions that you feel a little bit uncomfortable asking. But at some point, these situations or these issues will need to be addressed. It's better to do it before you've signed the contract so that you know exactly where you stand and so that you know what you're signing up to. Because once you've signed the contract, then you've kind of already committed yourself to the role. So you don't want to be learning loads of new information afterwards. And I think you really don't want to sign something that you don't agree with. So it's really important. Honestly, with every stage of this, I think the important thing is to be thorough. That would be my main advice. Be careful, take your time, be thorough, and just really make sure you nurture this new relationship before you even get here. In general, I would say it's not as stressful as I expected it to be. It's not as difficult, and it wasn't half as scary as I thought it would be. And I think a big part of that is because I was so prepared. I had done so much talking to the family. I'd really got to know them. And so I could be confident. I was confident going into it, and that's how you want to be. So thoroughness and openness are two really important things in the application process. So that's all of my tips for starting the au pair experience. The next episode will talk about initial challenges that you may face when you arrive in the country, when you meet the family. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for listening, and have a lovely day.